Here at Reader's Books, and I do want to just say a couple of boring things first. If you have anything that makes noise, cell phone, watch, tablet, beeper. Can you hear me if I stand here? Maybe? Hopefully? I don't know who can't hear me. So is that better?
Yes.
I guess it's better. Okay. Hopefully it'll be better for you because this part is not very interesting. I was just going to make a joke about beepers, and I don't think anybody has one anymore. Someone might. There might be a beeper still in the world. And then I wanted to let you guys know that Sharon's going to be signing the books afterwards. She's going to sign them in the middle of the store where the books were on display. So the trick to the evening is, of course, that she has to get from up here to over there. And the nice solution we've discovered to this situation is that the books are for sale at the counter in between. So when she's finished, when you buy me out of all my books, it's right there. Emil back here, my coworker who's recording the event, will have a post-it note. She'll take your name, and they will have it on the post-it note for Sharon to sign. So just prepare for that situation there. Otherwise, that's the boring part. This is a long walk. Sorry for this introduction, but I was thinking about horror movies lately. And I was thinking about how one of the scariest things in many movies are not remembering things. It's the idea of not being sure of your own thoughts and your own history. And I was thinking about how this is such a scary thing that we don't talk about enough. We don't take care of each other. We don't recognize that this is something that can happen to everybody. It probably will happen to everybody. And we all have to know how to face that in a way both practical and spiritual. And we've managed to land from the horror story. Sharon's book gives a practice and a pathway for figuring out how we can make that less scary and make our lives smoother towards the end of life. So if you can give her a round of applause, she'll tell you a lot more about it.
All right, first we'll check the mic. How is that?
Great.
Great, good. So hello everyone. It's so nice to be here, and I want to thank Reader's Books for having me, and I want to thank all of you for coming out. It's great to see so many faces. Some are new friends, some are old friends, and some are strangers who may become friends. So I really enjoy these events. One of the questions I often get is, why did I write this book? The reason I wrote this book was basically that I wrote the book I wished I had when I was first diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment, which was back in 2021. I could find books on dementia. There were a lot of those. I could find books on caregiving, but there was nothing about the early stages, and I really, really wanted to know more. So being the lifelong learner that I am, I dove into research studies, and I read as much as I could, and I started taking notes and writing in my journal. And as I shared some of those with other people, they thought this would be very beneficial for others as well. So I really wrote this book for others who are going through similar experiences as me, but I have also heard from readers that it can be impactful for everyone who is aging, which is all of us. The book has several different topics in it, from diagnosis to stigma and bias, which we have a lot of in this culture, and how to work with that for ourselves and with others when we experience it. It also goes into how do we find resources and support, as well as the grief that comes along with it. There's grieving on a constant basis when you're losing different abilities and aspects of yourself along the way. And then, of course, how to plan for the future. But the planning for the future that I really emphasize is not the planning we always talk about, the power of attorney for healthcare, the power of attorney for finances, where might I want to go when I need more care. Those are all really important. But to me, the most important is, how do we prepare for our emotional and spiritual well-being in the future? It's something that we often don't talk about. And there are things we can do right now that can support us now and also into the future. So to me, that's the heart of the book. I also include what I call on-the-spot meditations. I've been a meditator for more than 30 years, and these are meditations that I am Buddhist, but these are not necessarily Buddhist. Anyone can do these, and they literally are on the spot, meaning you can do them in the grocery store, you can do them when you're out for a walk or doing the dishes, or whenever you think of it. And hopefully these can be very supportive of your process as well. So people also often ask me, well, how did you know? How did you know you were having changes, and how did you get diagnosed? So I'm going to read a little bit of the beginning of the book that talks about that. So I want you to think back to the summer of 2021. We had been in the pandemic, and suddenly we had vaccines, and we all thought it was over. We were wrong. But it was a time when family was starting to visit again, and including my family. And so this begins with a visit from my sister. Her name is Janet, and she lived in Colorado, and she came out to La Crosse, Wisconsin, where I live, for a visit. This is the first chapter, and it's called In the Beginning. My sister Janet and I were enjoying some outdoor time in my backyard when a friend walked up the drive carrying a batch of morning glories for me. I met him with excitement, my arms wide open, so happy to see these vibrant young plants. I called out, "Oh, the marigolds are here." My friend stopped in his tracks. He looked at me quizzically, saying, "Morning glories." This could have been an easy slip of the tongue, no different from the frequent faux pas so familiar to folks my age. But the word marigold became stuck in my brain like a skipping record. When I was pointing out the various vegetables I planted in our raised bed, I called out each one a marigold. The tomatoes, lettuce, carrots, no matter what I was trying to describe, marigolds came out of my mouth. I didn't seem to be able to correct myself, which baffled and frustrated me. Janet giggled. I'm not sure if it was a nervous laugh or she really thought it was funny, but I didn't. The tipping point came during Janet's visit. We were spending a lot of time together as I became her quasi-tour guide as she explored housing options in the area. As I was driving around the local streets and neighborhoods, it took a lot of concentration for me to keep up with the conversation and find my way at the same time. I found this very tiring, but brushed it off as just a part of being so active again after such a long time of isolation. Then there was the marigold moment. Later that same week, Janet missed an important appointment because I had mistaken the date. My heart sank when I realized that I had mixed up the days and had even written it down incorrectly on my calendar. I was now convinced something beyond normal aging was happening. The next day, I called for an appointment with a neuropsychologist that I had seen previously. So this gets a little bit into diagnosis. You know, what is the diagnosis like? Some of you may have gone through this, I don't know. But the neuropsychology tests that they do when you actually see a neuropsychologist can take up to 2 to 3 hours long. And what they're testing is they're testing all these different parts of what we call cognition. There's all these different things that the brain has to be able to do for us to have not only our memories, but our word finding, etc. Now, back in 2019, so 2 years earlier, I had noticed some changes then, so I went through the testing already. And at that time, he said I was pretty normal, but there was one area that was down. At the same time, I had a very stressful job, so he suggested maybe it was stress, but if I noticed anything more, to come back. So in 2021, I went back. This time, not only was that area down even a little further, but there was another area that was down as well. And that's when he diagnosed me as having mild cognitive impairment. So I'm wondering how many people here have even heard of mild cognitive impairment? Oh wow, quite a few. Great. When I got that diagnosis, I had no idea what he was talking about. Um, the fortunate thing was I had a good doctor, and he gave me a handout, and he told me to go on the Alzheimer's Association website where I could read up on it, and I could also learn a little bit more about the risks of Alzheimer's because I was at a higher risk having MCI at this point. So I like to describe what MCI, mild cognitive impairment, is as part of a continuum. We all have some forgetfulness that happens with aging. That's normal. And then we have dementia on the very far end the other way. And that's when somebody can no longer take care of themselves from day to day. They have trouble dressing or showering, and they really need a lot of help. And then in the middle of those two is what they call mild cognitive impairment. So the cognitive issues are more than just normal aging, but not to the point of dementia. I still function pretty good, but I do have some areas where I struggle. So I like to just be sure that everyone is familiar and understanding these different terms, because they can be confusing at times. The other thing I like to talk about is, what does dementia mean? Because a lot of people think dementia and Alzheimer's are the same thing, and they aren't. Dementia is an overall umbrella term that's used for the symptoms of having more difficulty cognitively. Its cause can be very different things, and these are called different neurodegenerative diseases, and Alzheimer's is one of them. There's also Lewy body, frontal temporal dementia, vascular dementia. So there are different causes for the brain having difficulty with cognition. So dementia is an overall term that's used, but it doesn't actually tell you what disease process is going on. I think that's important to know too. Now, like I said, I got myself involved in some research pretty early on because I wanted to know more. And through the research study that I did, which was through the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, which they have across the country. Mine was in Madison, Wisconsin. They have one here in San Francisco, I know, and there may be others in the area I'm not familiar with. Through that, I had some PET scans, which is when they actually are able to trace the different proteins that build up, particularly in Alzheimer's, but also in some of the other neurodegenerative diseases. Through that, I found out that I do have an elevation of amyloid, which is one of them. So between that and the fact that I do have these areas that are going through a slow decline, yet every time I'm tested, there's a little bit more of a decline. So through those two things, they have concluded that my MCI is due to Alzheimer's. Now, not every MCI or mild cognitive impairment is from a progressive disease. Sometimes it's from a medication. Sometimes it's from lack of sleep. So it's really important to rule out all the other things that could be going on and not to assume right away that you have a neurodegenerative disease. So I think it's important to be sure that you know that in case you have had that diagnosis and you're curious, please talk to your doctor more about it. Excuse me a second. Now, another thing that people have always been curious about with me is, what are the symptoms like? What is it like when one of them comes up? I'm not going to get into all the specifics because that would just be a boring list, but I will read another section of the book called The Oh No Moments. So this chapter is called The Golden Opportunity of When Symptoms Arise. That might seem like a very strange title, to think of symptoms as a golden opportunity, but with my Buddhist practice, we look at any challenge as being an opportunity to work with ourselves. And so that's why I call them a golden opportunity. So this is one of my early oh no moments. Last fall, Frank and I were raking up the leaves in our yard. It was a simple routine moment for us as we slowly raked up the crunchy red maple leaves and talked about the garden. Frank asked a question about preparing the vegetable garden for the next year's planting. Should we put the compost down now in the fall or wait until the spring? We're used to making such day-to-day decisions together, and I tend to take the lead in the garden planning. But this question wasn't rocket science or unusual, but my brain could not make sense of it. I froze in the moment and couldn't think. The more I tried to figure it out, the more irritated and confused I felt. I kept raking, not looking up, as I tried to comprehend what was going on internally. Why couldn't I answer this? Frank asked again with a quizzical look. Finally, I shook my head and simply said, I can't talk about this right now. Can we talk about it later? And I walked away. I don't think Frank noticed at the time, but I was quite shaken. It was the first time I realized that my brain couldn't compute information the way I'm used to. There was a strange visceral feeling that happened along with the confusion and irritation. I've come to call this a neural shiver. I liken it to the sound of fingernails scratching a chalkboard, or being at a loud concert with flashing lights in the middle of a crowd and trying to recite a poem you learned back in grade school. That's the type of sensory overload I felt when Frank asked me about composting the garden. It sent an actual shiver down my spine and raised goosebumps on my arms. This was one of my early oh no moments, a time of disorientation and inability to think clearly, along with a sinking feeling in my gut and a racing heart. I wondered what this meant. Is it a new normal for me? Am I progressing more quickly than expected? Is this the quicksand slide into dementia? The shape of my life was changing. As I tried to make sense of it all, I needed time to integrate this new situation into my very being. It felt like a free fall without a parachute. What I couldn't know in that moment was that this type of experience would come and go in inconsistent and unexpected ways, rather than becoming a new solid reality until my memory fails me completely. My doctor once told me that this disease is unpredictable and illogical. I have come to realize for myself that Alzheimer's disease is not a linear progression with a well-delineated path from normal cognition to dementia. Standing at the gateway of Alzheimer's is more of a slow slog through brambles in the darkness of a moonless night, then stepping into an open flowering field of sunshine, all leading slowly down a gradual path into the valley of dementia. The changes begin subtly and sporadically, growing in significance over a long period of time. The odd thing for me is that there are still times when my memory is quite clear and I can help Frank find the car keys. Yet each time a symptom arises, a loved one's name forgotten, a familiar route suddenly alien, groundlessness occurs. In these moments of sudden disorientation, I must draw on deep reserves of self-compassion, curiosity, and openness in order to face the unpredictable and illogical nature of this disease. So to me, one of the gifts, one of the golden opportunity with an early diagnosis is we have time to adjust. Every time something new comes up, it's unfamiliar. I mean, it's like moving into a new house. Where is everything? How do I do this? But with time, we can adjust. People are very flexible. I'm a part of a support group for people with mild cognitive impairment and early dementia, and we often talk about workarounds, and we give each other tips and tricks. When something isn't working for someone, they'll bring it up in the support group, and recently, about a few months ago, someone brought up that they have trouble riding in a car. They just find it really disorienting. And she asked if anyone else did, and 3 of us raised our hands. Now, this isn't a symptom that's ever talked about, but because of depth perception issues, they call it spatial something, I don't remember, but it can make it very difficult to be in a car because it seems like all the other cars are coming right at you. And so we talked about different ways we work with it. One woman puts on headphones, another woman puts the radio on, and me, I like to look in the distance. You know, if I'm looking at the horizon, then I'm not paying that as much attention to the cars on the road, or if we're making the right turn, or any of the other things that drive me crazy. I did have to give up driving a few years ago, which is never an easy thing to do, but I had 3 close calls. And again, it was because of my depth perception, and so I decided it was time for me to give it up. But I've been very, very lucky in that my friends have come together, and every week I have a different driver who's assigned to me. And it's been a great way to deepen those friendships. I've gotten to know people in a way that I never knew them before. And some of them were just acquaintances, and now they're good friends. So this is why I think it can be very helpful to have an early diagnosis, because you do have time to adjust. You do have time to find resources to support you and help you through the process. There's also lifestyle changes that we can all make, and it gives you time to do that. And even as you're going through changes, these lifestyle changes can slow down the progression. And I've seen that for myself. I often say that writing this book was as much a gift to my brain as it was to any reader that will ever read the book. So it really helped me stay clear and focused in a way that I don't think I would have if I wasn't writing. I'm going to get down to what I consider the heart of the book, was how do we work with our emotions, and how do we work with our spirituality, whatever that means to you, in a way that it can support us now and into the future. I attended online, I attended some lectures that were a part of the International Alzheimer's Association. And so this was a professor from China, and she had done a research project following people from MCI all the way to dementia over a 10-year period. And what she found was those people who had some positive habits that they started early on, they could continue those into dementia, and they could still be supportive of a decent quality of life for them. Now, it's not going to be the same quality of life we may have now, but she followed one woman who early on she loved doing puzzles, and 10 years later she still loved to at least play with the puzzle pieces, even if she couldn't put a puzzle together. But this was true for people who meditated, this was true for people who practiced dance, painting, anything that kind of kept them engaged. Those things can carry through. I've also seen this with my mom. My mom is 95, and she's in a memory care facility with dementia. During the pandemic, she was living in an assisted living, so she had to stay in her room quite a bit. And she, of course, we couldn't visit her except through the window. So I bought her some of these adult coloring cards, you know, and some colored pencils, and she just fell in love with this. She still does that. Now she does big pictures instead of little ones. But she can spend hours coloring these pictures, and it brings her great pleasure. So, you know, it gives us an opportunity to really look at what can support us. There's another reason why I really encourage looking at our emotional well-being, and I'm going to read this one last little piece, and then I'm going to open it up for question and answer. This is called Emotional Memory and Dementia. Emotional memory and the ability to both feel and express emotions last well into the latter stages of dementia. Given this, I wondered if becoming more familiar with and knowing how to work with emotions in the early stages of cognitive change might benefit an overall sense of well-being and autonomy into the latter stages when other forms of memory and communication might not be accessible. Sorry, I lost my place. I have witnessed firsthand people with moderate and severe dementia continue to relate to the world through their emotions, even when they can no longer voice their thoughts, opinions, and feelings. One dementia ancestor, Marie, that's what I'm calling her, lived in a skilled nursing facility and was completely dependent on caregivers to dress and feed her. She often had a smile, although she was unable to speak. I worked as a certified nurse's aide at the time and would rotate with others caring for Marie. She had her favorites. When one of them would feed her lunch, she would smile, make eye contact, and willingly open her mouth accepting the food. When one of the CNAs she disliked would try to feed her, she would close her eyes and purse her lips, refusing to take a bite, and she could not be persuaded to eat. This became so obvious that we would switch assignments at mealtimes in order to accommodate her preferences. Seeing this type of expression of emotional awareness by Marie and others has shown me that our emotional connections and our true nature can remain intact and can sometimes be expressed even when our brain no longer functions properly, communication is lost, and behaviors change drastically. By learning to write out stormy feelings and recognize the impermanent nature of all emotion, people living with MCI and other neurodegenerative changes and their care partners may be able to improve their quality of life now and perhaps into the future. Now, I do go into more about how do you do that, and that leads to some of the on-the-spot meditations. Each chapter has at least one at the end. And I'm going to share a brief one with you right now because it's one that I find is pretty much foundational and also very simple. So I'll invite you to join me in this. If you don't want to, that's fine. You can just listen. You can do this with your eyes open or closed. And it's called the pause practice. So just take a few breaths. And now as you breathe in and out, just check in. How are you feeling physically right now, sitting in the chair or standing? What thoughts are in your mind? What do you feel emotionally? Now, just take another deep breath in and out and just let all of that go. You can open your eyes again if they're closed. That was a very quick taste. But that's the kind of thing that you can do anywhere, anytime. I like to do it when I'm washing dishes. I'll just pause and just check in. You know, how am I feeling right now? It actually builds up emotional resilience as we discover how our emotions come and go and change, sometimes quickly, sometimes not. But it gives us a better sense and a better awareness of where we are and how we're doing. It's very simple, but it can actually be quite profound if you practice it. So with that, I'm going to pause and ask for questions. I'm happy and would love to talk about anything that's on your mind. Yes?
When I look at you and listen to you and know that you wrote a book with this disease, you must be terribly disciplined. Could you tell us a little bit more about how, I mean, even at my age, and I don't think I have the disease, it's hard to focus sometimes and not get scattered. And so could you tell us a little bit more how you disciplined or focused yourself?
Sure. It's interesting because for me, when I got the diagnosis, since I had been a caregiver for most of my life, I've worked with many people who have dementia, And all these stories started flooding in, and all these faces of people that I had worked with, and all the lessons that I had learned from them, and I felt compelled to write. I mean, it really was like an obsession. I think my husband would verify that. I wrote a lot, and so I spent a lot of time at my computer writing. I would sometimes get up in the middle of the night because something came to me and I needed to get it down. At the same time, my sister became ill, and that's actually in the book as well. And so I actually had to take 6 months off because I was caregiving my sister as she was dying. And then my mother developed dementia. And then my brother-in-law needed assistance. So there were a lot of different things pulling on me at the same time, but I really just felt really driven to write this book, knowing that there was so little out there for other people, and wanting to share what I had learned and what I thought would be helpful for others. So I think it was that intention that kept me going.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? Yes?
I guess my question is, I have a friend she has cognitive impairment. I realize she doesn't have dementia yet, but she's definitely seems to be sliding that way. And she has kind of given up on any kind of improvement, and doesn't do much. And I also think that COVID played into that because of the isolation. And it just, it kind of ganged up, and friends didn't see what was happening to her. And so it seems to me that continuing to have a purpose is important.
Absolutely, absolutely. And sometimes that purpose will change over time. But we need to have some reason to get up in the morning. For my mom, as I said, right now, a lot of it is the coloring that she does. She also, even though she's a resident at this care facility, she also feels responsible for the other residents. One time she thought she was on a boat, and she was worried because she didn't think the other residents knew how to swim. So it can come up in different ways, but it sounds as though your friend might also be suffering from some depression, which is not unusual with mild cognitive impairment and other neurodegenerative diseases. Do you know if she's spoken to her primary care provider?
She's, actually her ex-husband has stepped in and he's been taking her to doctors, but I don't, there doesn't seem to be any particular outcome that is being suggested, which is frustrating to watch.
Sure. The other thing I would suggest, and I have some pamphlets and flyers where I'll be signing books about the Alzheimer's Association. They can be incredibly helpful. And I just spoke to someone, my first reading on the West Coast was up in Portland, and 2 women afterwards approached me who have mild cognitive impairment, wanting to know about a support group. And of course I didn't know anything about the area. So I've contacted people in the Alzheimer's Association here, and they are beginning to have more support groups across the country for people with early issues. It is so supportive to have a community of other people who are going through a similar thing. And also, like I said, learning the tips and tricks can be very helpful. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, someone behind you.
Yes, I would like you to elucidate a little more deeply the cognitive testing that you underwent for some 4 years ago, and the parameters that you said you were low in one measurement. And as a follow-up, how specifically objective and reproducible are these tests?
There, a caveat about the tests. They were developed 30 years ago, so they're very much out of date.
Okay.
But what they do is and it is, I can't remember the word you used. It can be, you can,
Objectively reproducible.
thank you, objectively reproducible. I like the term, I just couldn't remember it. So they test different areas of the brain, of cognition by they give me long lists of numbers, and can I remember them, and then can I remember backwards?
Right.
Things like that, lists of words. They'll tell me a story, and then 20 minutes later ask me to repeat it. Things like that. Drawings, can you draw a cube? Can you draw a clock? All of these things. The area that I was first low in was processing. So it takes me a little bit longer to process, which is a part of remembering and a part of thinking. The second time it was processing and also spatial. So they actually show you different angles of lines, and I didn't do so good on that. And that's the same issue that is why I'm not driving anymore. And I have had it a third time, and I have my fourth coming up in September. So the third time I had it, it was processing the spatial, and now new learning was slower, which really bummed me out. The others were like, oh, okay, but I consider myself a lifelong learner, and I didn't like the idea that it's harder to learn now, but I know when I'm sitting at the computer and something new comes up, I'm just like, oh, I can't do that, So,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Yes.
How do you get started? How do you get people to recognize that you want some help? Like figure out if you have this non-cognitive thing that you talked about. How do you get a doctor to pay attention to you?
Yeah, it depends on the doctor. And what I have learned, I've had some good doctors and I've had some bad doctors. What I have learned is you sometimes have to go to more than one. Maybe talk to friends or family and see if you can find someone that other people have found that they're responsive to your concerns. Because it usually takes a primary care provider to make a referral for you to get the kind of neurocognitive testing that I'm talking about with most insurances. So you need to start with a primary care provider. Sometimes taking an advocate with you, someone in your life who also maybe shares your concerns, and have them written down so that it's not just you mentioning them. And sometimes it's hard to say these things to a doctor. So having an advocate with you can be very helpful. My husband comes with me to just about every appointment, although they don't let him in with the testing. And I go with him to most of his, because if it's his appointment, I become the scribe and vice versa. It really helps to have a second pair of ears and also somebody to advocate. I recently saw a new neuropsychologist who was just kind of shining me on and, oh, you seem fine. And my husband stepped in and said, well, at home she's doing this, she forgot this, she's burned herself this many times, she's left the gas on this many times. He was able to really say, no, these aren't just her saying she has issues, I'm seeing these issues, and that made a difference. Yeah.
Hi, Sharon. I was wondering if you could talk a little about the relationship between cognition and consciousness.
You need to come on Friday. Yeah. The difference between cognition and consciousness, is that what yeah. It's a big question in Buddhist circles. And I'll give you my quick answer and the way I talk about it in the book, because it's for people of any belief. Within Buddhism, we also talk about Buddha nature, which is our innate warmth and compassion and love and joy, that these are qualities of an open heart. And I have seen in people with dementia, those qualities don't go away. They can be there. And I'm trying to decide which story to share. Um, Mary, who, that's not her real name, but that's one of the stories I share in here. She was just a joyful person, and I first met her when I was doing home care, and I lived with her for a period of time until her issues got so difficult that she needed to go into a nursing home. And then I would visit her there, and I visited her there for years. Even when she didn't even know who I was anymore and she couldn't speak, she still greeted me with this huge smile and the glint in her eye, and she'd give me a big hug. She didn't even know who I was anymore. So I've seen that so often. Now there is one thing I have to say too, that sometimes people do have personality changes. And their personality may become very different than what they were earlier in their lives. So you may not see that Buddha nature quite so easily, but I am convinced that it's still there. And we can talk more about that too. We're going to have a Buddhist gathering to talk about some of the deeper Buddhist issues later in the week. Yeah. Other questions? Yes.
Quite a long time ago, after when I was younger, when I was a kid, my aunt would visit, and after she visited, my mother would call me by her name, she would call me my aunt's name. And of course there's the parents with a lot of kids who call them all those different names. And sometimes when she was doing that, I thought, I realized that it was connection that mattered in a sense. It was the connection that was recognized and not the name.
Yes.
And when you said, when you talked about Mary, it occurred to me that she knew you were friends. She still knew that.
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. And one question I sometimes get that I'll take this opportunity to bring up is people often worry about developing cognitive issues when they start forgetting names. Forgetting names is one of the most common issues for normal aging. Now, if you forget, I've had the experience of have someone come over and give me a big hug and I had no idea who they were. And I did actually know them. They weren't a stranger. But it wasn't until I heard someone else say their name that I could place who they were. So that's a little different than forgetting someone's name.
Mm-hmm.
But you're absolutely right. My mom doesn't always know exactly who I am when I get there. Usually she'll remember after a while, but she doesn't always. But definitely the connection is what's important. And I think it's important to remember that when people become nonverbal, because I've had people say, well, why should I visit? They can't talk with me anymore. But it's the presence. It's being present with them, which is the most important thing. Yes?
And listening to your talk today, the thing that really impressed me that has been missing in the conversations outside is around self-kindness.
Mm-hmm.
And how, especially as you go into the more dementia, how to access self-kindness as a way of allowing yourself to have those experiences of love, joy, etc., that are innate.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really curious about what other practices around self-kindness that can help with dementia.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think they are one of the number one habits that you can develop now that can really support you and sustain you later. And there's quite a few of them in the book, so I won't get into them too much. There's one little part though that I will share, because it can start with the pause practice. So one of my stories, I've become very clumsy. Again, it's the depth perception, but there was one day when I dropped my favorite glass teapot on the floor, full of hot tea. And the first thing I did was, that was so stupid. first thing. And I started mopping it up and stuff, and then I realized how much I was berating myself. So I did the pause practice and let myself really feel what I was feeling. And then I decided I'd do something a little different, and I said, "Oh, wasn't that a shame?" Instead of saying I was stupid. So that's one quick example. And there's more in the book about how you can do that. But absolutely, that's one of the habits that we can all develop right now, and it's going to help you now and well into the future. Yeah,
Well said.
yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes.
I know you're going to address this on Friday, and I want to hear more about Friday. How does having a Buddhist practice help a person who is developing dementia?
I think having any strong faith practice can help a person who's developing dementia. Buddhism is certainly mine, but I have seen Mary, who I mentioned. She was a devout Catholic, and her Catholicism meant a lot to her. And even when she couldn't recognize or speak much anymore, if I started saying the Lord's Prayer, she could say it with me. So it isn't a matter of one faith over the other. And I have another story about my mom around this. My mom knows I'm Buddhist, and that I have a close relationship with Pema Chodron, who's a famous Buddhist teacher. And so I had a picture of Pema that I gave my mother, and she has it in the care facility sitting on her table next to a recliner. Every time I go see her, she points to it and says, "She's with me." And it just, it gets me every time, But it's so important to have something like that, whether it's a crucifix, a picture of Pema, a picture of your favorite place where you went fishing, It doesn't have to be one particular thing, but something that means a lot to you. The other thing for my mom is I have a little photograph of the house where she grew up, and every time she sees it, she lights up. So, whatever it is that brings you some joy and gives you that sense of purpose and belonging, think of them now and then plan for them in the future. You can write those wishes down. I certainly have. And I've even started recording some of the Buddhist prayers and songs that I want to have played for me when I'm no longer able to do them myself. So there's a lot we can do right now to plan for our emotional and spiritual well-being, which to me is just as important, if not more so, than our physical well-being. More questions?
Yeah, can you,
Oops, I have one back there in the end.
So I don't know about this Friday.
Oh, I shouldn't have brought it up. You want to speak to this?
Oh, okay. My name is Rachel, and I am, I guess at the moment, representing the Sonoma Shambhala Center, which is down the street. And we invited Sharon to come and talk more specifically about Buddhist practice on Friday evening at 5:30, and you are welcome to come. We'd love to have people come. I think a lot of our members will be there, but it would be great if you want to come. It will be, I think, it's going to be very informal. It's free. It's open to everybody, and the intention was just to kind of take it a little bit more in the direction of practice, Buddhist practice. So you've heard some of that. And many of us who practice there already do some of these practices, so it might be more in depth.
Where is this again, please?
Sonoma Shambhala Center is, I cannot remember the address, but it's in the street.
It's
West Napa. Yeah, it's,
Thank you.
It's just beyond the Sonoma Marketplace.
yes, it's in the little building that for many years Copy Store and More was there, but they're gone now, so it's,
Whole Foods.
it's
behind
beyond
Whole
Whole Foods, and the driveway into Whole Foods, yeah. So, come if you want, 5:30.
5:30 on
Friday.
This Friday?
Yes.
Yeah. And you had a question?
Same thing.
Oh, okay.
Oh, boy, you better. They have a huge crowd.
Right, right. Any other questions? All right, well, I'm going to end this with, oh, one more.
I just wondered if you could offer any just kind of general advice about how forming support groups for cognitive impairment come about.
The ones that I know of come about through the Alzheimer's Association. So what I've found out when I talked to someone here, there's been one going on in Wisconsin for a very long time. And so it was already going when I was diagnosed, and I found out about it and joined. However, I found out that this is kind of a new area across the country for Alzheimer's Association, so they're just getting started. Starting your own, it's an interesting idea. I think it would take someone who can be a facilitator, because we have a wonderful facilitator who makes sure everybody gets heard and included, and she's wonderful at sending reminders for us all. It's on Zoom.
Oh, that's what I was gonna.
Yeah, it's on Zoom, which makes it easy because you can do it from your house, you know. So starting your own is an interesting idea, but it would take more time and energy than I would have. And for most people with issues, I think it's easier to join and have a good facilitator. Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to read something that is at the end of one of my chapters that I like to offer just kind of as a blessing. My hope is that you feel fully immersed in life and keep tapping your toes to your favorite tunes as you go forward into the unknown future with gentleness, patience, and determination. Thank you all.